Hello, everyone. Picture this. A young woman in a white dress stands motionless on a spinning platform. Two robotic arms move toward her, spraying her body with black and yellow paint. The music pulses. The crowd holds its breath. She doesn't flinch. She becomes the canvas. She becomes the art. That moment at Alexander McQueen's Spring 1999 show didn't just make fashion history, it immortalized Shalom Harlow. She wasn't the loudest model, she wasn't the flashiest, but when Shalom moved, time slowed down. She had a presence that whispered instead of screamed, and somehow that was louder. She could look innocent in one frame, haunted in the next, a ballerina in chaos, a ghost in couture. In the 1990s, while the fashion world adored high-octane glamazons, Shalom carved out her own space ethereal, expressive, untamed. She wasn't just a model, she was a performer, a muse, a mystery. But what happens when the industry that once worshipped you forgets you? What happens when the girl who became the face of modern beauty disappears into silence? This is the story of Shalom Harlow, the model who made fashion hold its breath, then vanished, and came back stronger, stranger, and more stunning than ever. Shalom Harlow was born in a cabin in the woods, literally, raised in Oshawa, Ontario, Canada. She didn't grow up with catwalks or couture. She grew up with trees, horses, and silence. Her mother was a social worker, her father, a contractor. Their home was modest, surrounded by wilderness, far from the chaos of the cities where beauty is currency. There were no fashion magazines on the coffee table, no talk of New York or Paris. But there was music. Her parents were hippies, lovers of nature and self-expression. Shalom spent her childhood dancing barefoot, climbing trees, drawing in the dirt. Her playground was the forest. Her mirrors were lakes and shadows. Even her name, Shalom, was different. It meant peace. A strange word for someone who would grow up to embody such creative turbulence. But maybe that contradiction was always part of her design. She was quiet, observant, but never passive. There was something curious in her gaze, something searching. At school, she didn't quite fit. She wasn't the prom queen. She wasn't the loud girl. But people noticed her height, her grace, the way she moved like she was listening to music no one else could hear. At 13, she started studying ballet, not to become a ballerina, but because movement made sense to her. She didn't speak loudly, but her body did. Her limbs were long, her gestures were deliberate. She carried emotion in her posture before she ever posed for a camera. No one in her world expected her to become a supermodel, not even her. But the seeds were there in the woods, in the quiet, in the wildness. She wasn't groomed for fame. She was grown like something organic, untamed, and impossible to replicate. Shalom Harlow didn't chase fashion. Fashion found her. At age 17, she was spotted at a Cure concert in Toronto by a talent scout. She wasn't dressed to impress, no designer labels, no red lips, just jeans, boots, and that same quiet magnetism she carried through the forests of her childhood. A few weeks later, she was signed to a modeling agency. She had no portfolio, no experience, no plan, but she had presence, and that in fashion is gold. Her first test shoots were unconventional. She didn't pose like other girls. She didn't smile on command or freeze into standard beauty. She moved. She tilted her head just slightly, stared down the lens with eyes that told stories. Photographers were captivated. She wasn't technically perfect, but she was spellbinding. Within months, she was walking in her first runway shows in Paris and New York. Not as filler, but as a face designers requested by name. There was something haunting in her look. She didn't just wear the clothes, she gave them a soul. On the runway, she looked like a painting come to life. In print, like a memory you couldn't quite place. She wasn't chasing fame. She was exploring expression. When asked in early interviews about her goals, she spoke about art, not money. She referenced music, emotion, surrealism. She was, in many ways, an accidental model, an artist who happened to be born into the right bones, the right face, the right decade. Back home, people were stunned. The quiet girl from Oshawa in Vogue in Harper's Bazaar. On the cover with Naomi, Cindy, Kate. But Shalom didn't let it rattle her. She approached the fashion world like a dream, strange, beautiful, temporary. She didn't fight to belong. She simply was. In a world built on control and conformity, Shalom Harlow entered like a breeze through a cathedral, soft, unexpected, unforgettable. By the mid-1990s, Shalom Harlow wasn't just a model. She was the model directors, designers, and photographers requested when they wanted more than beauty, when they wanted atmosphere. She wasn't loud, she wasn't overposed. And that's exactly why she became unforgettable. Her face was on the cover of every major fashion magazine: Vogue, Elle, Harper's Bazaar, W Magazine. Her image moved between innocence and intensity, from delicate muse to gothic siren, depending on the vision. But she never lost herself in the transformation. Shalom didn't perform fashion, she embodied it. Designers loved her. Karl Lagerfeld once called her a silent storm. Versace adored her elegance. Valentino trusted her with his most delicate gowns. But it was Alexander McQueen who would give her the most haunting, iconic moment of her career. In his spring 1999 show, McQueen placed her alone on a spinning platform. Dressed in a plain white tulle dress, 2 robotic arms surrounded her. Slowly, mechanically, they began spraying her body with jets of black and neon yellow paint. The room went still. Shalom didn't flinch. She turned gracefully, letting herself be transformed into living art. That moment became legend. A single, wordless performance that blended fear, beauty, vulnerability, and power. It wasn't just fashion, it was theater. It was alchemy. But Shalom's dominance wasn't just on the runway. She crossed into film, appearing in small roles that echoed her ethereal presence. She hosted House of Style for MTV alongside Amber Valletta, offering fans a glimpse behind the fashion curtain. She brought intelligence and subtle humor to a world that too often flattened models into mannequins. Even among the supermodel elite Cindy, Naomi, Claudia Shalom stood apart. She didn't dominate headlines with scandals. She didn't chase the spotlight. She simply moved through the world with grace and mystery, letting her work speak. In a decade defined by excess, Shalom Harlow was a breath of stillness, a surreal figure in a chaotic industry, a model who reminded the world that presence can whisper and still roar. In an era obsessed with perfection, symmetry, and control, Shalom Harlow was chaos in its most beautiful form. Not reckless, not loud, but quietly defiant. She never fit the mold of a typical supermodel, and she never tried to. If the fashion world expected her to be glossy, predictable, always smiling, Shalom responded with raw emotion, avant-garde instincts, and a kind of vulnerability no one knew what to do with. She didn't cling to brand deals or celebrity boyfriends. She didn't build an empire of perfumes or fashion lines. While others were mastering the business of modeling, Shalom was mastering the art of it. Her rebellion was subtle but radical. She refused to become a product. She chose projects for meaning, not for money. She worked with photographers like Steven Meisel and Inez and Vinud because they treated her like a collaborator, not a prop. She brought depth to editorials that could have been shallow. She looked into the lens like it was a conversation, not a transaction. While the industry celebrated overt sexuality, Shalom often embodied something more enigmatic. Her beauty wasn't about seduction, it was about suggestion. She could be soft, strange, ghostly, electric, all in the same frame. She gave fashion the freedom to be surreal, not just sexy. And she didn't chase trends. When the heroin chic era pushed pale, thin, and haunted as the aesthetic, Shalom didn't need to adapt. She was the aesthetic without even trying. But she never exploited it. She stayed true to herself, even when the world wanted exaggeration. There were times when she vanished from the spotlight without explanation. She missed seasons. She turned down shows. She disappeared from covers. People speculated. Was she done, burned out, forgotten? The truth was simpler and braver. Shalom never wanted to be everywhere. She wanted to be right in the right projects, the right spaces, the right headspace. She didn't fear absence. She respected it. In a profession built on being seen, Shalom's power was knowing when to step back, when to breathe, when to say no. She didn't fight the system by shouting. She dismantled it by walking away from it whenever it stopped making sense. One day, Shalom Harlow was everywhere, and then she wasn't. There was no dramatic headline, no scandal, no farewell. She simply faded from the fashion world. And for years, no one really knew why. What the public didn't see, what the cameras never captured, was that Shalom had been suffering in silence. Years of constant travel, high-pressure environments, toxic backstage chaos, and physical demands had taken a brutal toll on her body. She developed chronic health issues, undiagnosed pain, exhaustion, inflammation that made even walking a runway unbearable. Fashion had celebrated her movement, her flow, her ability to transform. But now, her body was failing her. And worse, no one seemed to understand. In an industry that demanded perfection, illness was invisible, weakness was shameful, and rest was rarely an option. So, Shalom vanished. She returned to nature, back to her Canadian roots, back to forests and rivers and stillness. She spent years out of the spotlight, focusing on healing. She explored alternative medicine, meditation, somatic therapy. She learned how to feel safe in her body again, how to live with it instead of fighting it. During those years, she missed out on a modeling renaissance. The new wave of supermodels rose: Bella, Gigi, Kendall. The industry shifted. But Shalom stayed away, not bitter, not forgotten, just recovering. She rarely spoke in public, but when she did, her words carried weight. In a quiet interview, she once said, "My nervous system was shot. I needed to remember who I was before the noise." And maybe that's what she'd been doing all along, not escaping fame, but returning to essence. When she finally reemerged, it wasn't with a loud comeback, it was with grace. In 2019, Shalom walked the runway for Versace strong, striking, luminous. The crowd erupted, but she didn't smile in triumph. She simply stood, whole, steady, present. It wasn't a return to modeling, it was a return to herself. Shalom Harlow didn't fall. She withdrew because healing sometimes looks like disappearance. Shalom Harlow never chased the crown, yet she left footprints on the runway that no one could erase. She was the anti-supermodel in a supermodel era, fluid instead of fierce, spiritual instead of strategic, real instead of manufactured. Her legacy isn't about the number of campaigns she booked or the brands she wore. It's about how she made people feel. That moment in McQueen's Robotic finale. The covers where her gaze wasn't seductive, but haunting. The way she let silence speak louder than spectacle. For a generation of artists, designers, and dreamers, Shalom wasn't a trend. She was a reminder that beauty can be strange, that stillness can be powerful, and that stepping away can be an act of strength. She may not have dominated headlines, but she dominated memory. And maybe that's the truest kind of icon. Not the one who demands attention, but the one who haunts you long after she's gone.